A week before Congress passed the joint resolution authorizing war against Iraq in 2003, an Illinois state senator stood up before an anti-war rally in Chicago. He described Saddam Hussein as a bad guy who the world and the Iraqi people would be better off without. But then State Senator Obama said this, quote, "I also know that Saddam poses no direct threat, no imminent and direct threat to the United States or to his neighbors, that the Iraqi economy is in shambles, that the Iraqi military a fraction of its former strength, and that in concert with the international community, he can be contained until, in the way of all petty dictators, he falls away into the dustbin of history. I know that even a successful war against Iraq will require an occupation, a U.S. occupation of undetermined length at undetermined cost with undetermined consequences. I know that an invasion of Iraq without a clear rationale and without strong international support will only fan the flames of the Middle East and encourage the worst rather than best impulses of the Arab world and strengthen the recruitment arm of al-Qaeda. I'm not opposed to all wars," he said. "I'm opposed to dumb wars." The number of U.S. troops in Iraq since that young state senator became president of the United States has dropped by 90,000 and will apparently drop to zero by this time next year. The number of U.S. troops in Afghanistan, however, since that young state senator became president, has tripled. Joining us now is Andrew Bacevich. He's professor of history and international relations at Boston University. He retired at the rank of colonel after 23 years in the United States Army, and he's author of the new book, Washington Rules, America's Path to Permanent War. Professor Bacevich, thanks very much for being here.
Thanks for having me on the program.
Do you think there's really no difference between Democrats and Republicans on the biggest, most important issues of national security?
The differences are far smaller than one would conclude from all the rhetoric and the hype. I've long believed that if you're looking for the big truths about American politics, about the way Washington works, you don't look for the differences between the Republicans and the Democrats. You look for the continuities. And I think when it comes to national security policy, going all the way back to the beginning of the Cold War, the continuities are quite evident and very strong and continue down to the present day with a president who promised that he was going to change the way Washington works.
And that, to you, boils down to Washington rules, this credo that America has to determine sort of the means by which the rest of the world is allowed to run, and that we need to enforce that by global military dominance. That means having troops everywhere all over the world, being able to project force all over everywhere in the world, and being repeatedly, almost in a recidivist way, being interventionist all the time.
Exactly right. I was really struck by that quotation from State Senator Obama, who at that point is not a creature of Washington, and who in that quotation reflected, I think, a real skepticism about the way we do our national security policy. That skepticism today with President Obama has long since vanished. I mean, you have to be struck by the fact that President Obama has followed a path in Afghanistan that is probably identical to the path that Senator McCain would have followed had we elected Senator McCain president. There is no real change when it comes to national security policy. And as someone who voted for the president and admires the president, I have to say that absence of change is not only disappointing, I think it may even qualify as tragic.
The difference that I see between a theoretical McCain presidency and the actual Obama presidency on Afghanistan is that withdrawal deadline. Now, the administration has taken great pains to make that withdrawal deadline for next summer seem very squishy. And if there is no withdrawal, then I'd say you're right. But if there is withdrawal, if they really do wind that war down and end it, and don't let it go on permanently, isn't that a potential crack in the consensus? Isn't a break in permanent war sort of an opportunity to question that as our default path?
It could well be, but I mean, the scenario that you're suggesting is one in which President Obama in the summer of 2011 is in effect, I think, going to have to say, the decision I made back in December of 2009 was an incorrect decision. And now please elect me to a second term as your president. I mean, he is really going to be, I think, in a real political pickle, because when we get to next summer, it's highly unlikely that conditions in Afghanistan will be any better than they are today.
Can't
I mean,
that
the counterinsurgency strategy devised by General McChrystal, and I think endorsed by General Petraeus, is not working.
Couldn't that reasonably be a grounds to explain why we're leaving, though? To say, hey, counterinsurgency isn't making things any better. Us staying there isn't going to make things any better. Let's try to do it in a civilian, diplomatic, aid-based way. We're leaving?
I mean, I would hope that he would say that. And indeed, if he did, if we have seen the failure of the conventional military instrument. We've seen the failure of shock and awe. Counterinsurgency is supposed to be sort of the new American way of war that does it better. If the president says, well, counterinsurgency doesn't work either, then yes, that really could, I think, create an opportunity for a fundamental rethinking of how we imagine military power can be utilized, and we would find ourselves greatly sort of shrinking the domain in which we would see military power as useful. Something which I think would be wonderful. I just think that the politics are going to make that very, very difficult for him to do.
It is interesting, though. I've read all of your books. I've interviewed you a number of times, as you know, and I find your thinking on this stuff very interesting. But I felt like in Washington Rules, I started to see through your eyes a way that this thing that you decry, this consensus, might end. It's conceivable. I don't think you're hopeful about it, but I do think it's conceivable.
Well, I mean, to my mind, if the consensus is ever going to be confronted and challenged, I believe that the challenge is going to have to come from us. It's going to have to come from Americans. And alas, that's not going to happen until Americans come to appreciate all of the consequences of our misguided wars. Some of those consequences are moral. Some of those consequences are fiscal. I think some of those consequences are strategic. Alas, in this open-ended military project that began after 9/11, the American people have pretty much checked out of the net. You know, very few of us sacrifice, not too many of us serve. None of us are even asked to pony up the money to pay for these wars. That just gets passed on to some other generation to deal with. So we, the people, I think, have failed in our responsibility as much as our political leaders have failed in their responsibility in this regard.
Professor Andrew Bacevich, thanks for your service in the Army. Thanks for your service as a critic of foreign policy and war policy in your time since leaving the Army. As I said, I've been a real admirer of yours for a long time. Thanks for being here on the show.
Thank you very much.
Good to see you.
Thanks.
The book is called Washington Rules, America's Path to Permanent War. Okay, so do you or someone you know have a phobia about gay people riding on Amtrak? A story that will address that deep, strange fear is next.